Welcome.
My name is Tori Matta.
And I'm Alana Curtis. Today, our lesson will focus on space and what occupying space means in different contexts.
Everyone, take a second and think about the space that you're occupying right now. You're sitting at a desk, in a classroom, or at home. Your books, your coat, your computer, they're all taking up space too. But what do we even mean by taking up space? Well, 5th grade science tells us that space is the 3D realm which surrounds you at all times. Remember, you are mass, which is something that takes up said space. But space is more than that. As human beings, we organize and interact with space in a wide variety of ways.
Think about every decision that someone had to make for you to be sitting in this spot. In any indoor location, the walls creating the room you're in were previously planned. In any outdoor space, it's likely that the surroundings have been modified in some way, perhaps with a sidewalk, roads, or clearing in a park. Regardless, the space you're in right now is probably not exactly the same as it was maybe 250 years ago.
Today, we will explore what it really means to be fully immersed in your surroundings by reimagining them in ways that adapt to you, personally through the iconic column of Trajan and the unconventional parking day.
But Tori, who is Trajan?
What a good question, Alana. Well, Trajan was exactly the type of guy you would imagine to be the emperor of Rome at one point in time. Throughout his rule, with the help of his trusty army, expanded the Roman Empire by conquering the territory of the barbaric Dacians, whose land had occupied parts of Eastern Europe.
That's exactly what the column depicts, the civilized stepping in to transform these awful savages. Going up the column, as you can see from these relief depictions, the Romans pushed their borders further and further back, but in reality the Dacians cannot be considered savage.
It is only pejorative because Trajan saw them as the other, not as civilized as Rome. That vocabulary gives the power of credibility to the emperor and lets the column act as a piece of propaganda. During this time, there was a lot of public distrust with the Roman military. Trajan knew it was essential to justify the imperialistic campaign.
Each episode of the relief shows a historic moment in the journey. Throughout their expedition, we follow them across perilous rivers, over the treacherous terrain of mountains, and through ominous forests. As part of the story, the Romans on the column are seen making physical alterations to the space around them. By building bridges, roads, and infrastructures, they are constantly outsmarting nature and the elements in order to adhere to Romanization.
Throughout the narrative, it can be noticed that there is overall little depiction of the natural world. This gives the idea of building a civilization a much larger impact to the audience. The theme is also enhanced by the constant changing of space. Trajan and his army are continually moving from one space to another, but not in the sense of a savage and nomadic hunter-gatherer. Rather, they modify the spaces by leaving a touch of civilization here and a pinch of progress there. In fact, there are less battle and violence scenes depicted in order to focus solely on the benefactor of imperialism and Romanization.
Location, 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 right? The column is placed in the center of the Forum of Trajan, a physical marker of the center of Rome. It's a place for their community to gather, so people are always occupying that space. The Forum reminds these visitors about about the great achievements of the Roman Empire. Again, the column is acting as a form of propaganda. To the east and west of the column are two libraries. To the south of the column stands the Basilica Oppia. The column is physically surrounded by education and religion. The architectural scene is in its entirety is meant to overwhelm visitors by its vast size and serve as a marker of civilization. On the thought of construction of the Forum, it should be noted that the crew building this complex had to completely refigure the hills that surrounded its current location. Redefining the city center was no easy task, and once completed, it was not to be forgotten that Trajan was responsible. Now, think about boundaries and how the city of Rome is defined by walls. Every time a wall is built or a border is drawn, instantly an interior and exterior environment is defined. When the Forum was constructed, much like the building of a house or any other structure, it concludes with an inside and an outside space. On the inside of the Forum, a story of triumph is told, restoring faith in the Roman legacy. On the exterior, Roman citizens marvel at the massive size of the column and can enter into the Forum to feel connected to their emperor and safe within his rule. Basically, you're either in Rome or you're out.
David Summers, in his text Real Spaces, gives a scholarly account on the definitions of periphery and center. He explains that the area that lays between the borders of various cultures is the periphery, where you are not in one specific culture or another. In other words, your location, with respect to the relations of others, is unclear. When traveling from Rome to Eastern Europe, the Romans blurred any distinction there may have been in the boundaries. While in transit, before they had reached any destination, they were not in any one culture. But when Roman culture usurped that of the Dacians, perception of space and periphery must be adjusted accordingly. On the other hand, Rome had overtly strived to be the best of the best and the center of the world. Architectural spaces, such as the Forum, are meant to remind us that Rome is the center and the rest of civilization revolves around it. As Summers sees it, centers tend to situate themselves in the middle of everything new and improved. It is always the urban centers that receive new technology first, have the most elaborate architecture, and mediate the highest density of communication and commerce. Proximity and convenience is what establishes a center. This is where people from really any direction can converge. It is less likely for a small village in the past, similar to small suburbs and rural areas of the present, to be built up like the center. Summers argues that the center instills unity and identity into a group of people. Rome is the quintessential example because they knew they were so advanced.
Physically, the column stands on the same axis as an equestrian statue of the emperor himself, eternally facing the column. Literally nothing stands between him and his conquest. Even in death, Trajan occupies that space. At one point in time, his ashes were buried within the base of the column, perpetually contributing as the foundation of his expansion. His memory and legacy are permanent and unmoving.
So, the space around the column is a highly official plaza, which is permanent and has one purpose: to dictate Trajan's legacy while serving as a public space to his people. Today, many design concepts and architectural strategies are focused on the malleability of spaces and multi-purposed areas.
An urban initiative known as Parking Day started in 2005 when two guys decided to redefine public space by creating a temporary public park in a normal metered parking space in downtown San Francisco. Since then, Parking Day has turned into a global movement calling attention to the need for more open and public spaces in urban areas. Every year, no matter what, Parking Day is on the third Friday of September. Today, Parking Day is recognized in over 162 cities around the world.
What exactly do people do for it, Alana?
You know, it's an interesting concept. What they do is pay the meter for a parking space for whatever amount of time they want to spend. Actually, here's a picture of the very first one in San Francisco. Once their meter is up, they can pack and leave, no problem. By the time they clean up, it's like they were never there, save for the picture. The original creators decided to do this because so little space in urban areas is designated for the general public to enjoy.
But how do they actually make it into a park?
Everyone goes out and buys sod and rolls it out into the ground within their parking spots. Then from there, people can decorate it however they want. Some people put in park benches and hammocks, some people have picnics and play games. Lots of people bring pets. It's whatever you decide to make of the space.
So, the Forum and Column of Trajan are permanent architectural structures. Meanwhile, the idea behind Parking Day comes from the blissful ephemerality of it. Really, the digital archive that is on the Parking Day's website is the only way for the movement to have any sense of permanence. Once the parks are online, they will be there forever, even if not in real life. The column is a stationary object that portrays a very outward story, existing to document the achievements of the Romans. Meanwhile, the idea behind Parking Day actually is to redefine the conventions of urban space, basically protesting the idea of regular urban spaces that the Romans were striving for. The Romans wanted to celebrate their triumphs and make their legacy be known, whereas the people and organizations behind Parking Day are simply trying to change the way space is approached in urban areas.
Parking Day is a great way to let people recreate their environment. What if the regular, everyday Romans would have had a say as to what public space and architecture should look like? What would be different? How would they have wanted Rome to look? How would this redefine the way human history was shaped?
Something to think about regarding to the space and how we inhabit it is why, as humans, do we constantly feel the need to have more land and more space than others? Think of space on a global scale. Generally speaking, war and conflict have a lot to do with land and wanting more of it. Since chiefdoms started forming and city-states started rising, this is an issue that humans will always face and fight over. This past summer, and continuing on today, the U.S. has been struggling to enforce immigration laws on the U.S.-Mexico border, a continual battle between lawmakers, citizens, and immigrants. Similar examples and conflicts are seen elsewhere. There is intense conflict happening with Palestine and Israel. There have been problems with land in that particular section of the Middle East, especially since Israel became a state in 1948, and especially since the battle is over land that is dubbed holy by the three Abrahamic religions. It was only last year that the Philippines and Indonesia settled a 20-year dispute over borders.
Tension between Pakistan and India over territory of Kashmir has continued since 1947. Ukraine separatists began to push the boundaries, quite literally speaking, with Russia in April 2014. Pretty much since the Cold War, North and South Korea have been experiencing tension over the border. The list goes on. Space is something we literally are constantly occupying, and that's why we try to adapt it to our lives all the time. But really, what's the problem? Is it still about resources and who can get the better and most of it? Does the size of one's reign and empire equate to the size of his status amongst others of higher status? Do we feel like we have more power over others when we dominate a certain amount of territory? These are questions that can help us understand how personal space is and how we establish a specific set of people to shape our space.
Well, we hope you enjoyed our lesson on space, and to conclude, we just want to pose a few questions for you all to consider the next time you enter a new or old space.
How does the physical location of both parking day and the column of Trajan affect the ways in which people interact with the space and each other? In other words, what role does community play in these spaces?
Think of a very defined space in your community. What else could this space function as, and how would public perspective change as a result?
Lastly, if you could design your own parking day parking spot, what would you do? Would you make a park? Would there be benches and bird baths, maybe a swing set? To help you out, we've attached the official parking day manual to our PowerPoint.